Hello, residents of Goodwin House. My name's Mark. I'm one of the chaplaincy interns working with Liz Pomerleau in the winter CPE unit, and she has invited me to spend a few minutes chatting with you again. You may remember from our first conversation that I am a seminary student, but years ago, I used to be an English teacher. And one of the things that I liked about being an English teacher, one of the things that drew me to teaching English to begin with, was the way certain pieces of language can lodge themselves in your head and then provide a way to make sense of experience years later. So one of the things I love about literature, about language generally, is the way it helps us understand what's happening in the world. It gives us a kind of foundation for meaning. The best sort of example that I received of that as a teacher myself was I had a student once who came back to visit the school many years after graduating, and she told me that when she heard about the attack on the World Trade Center on September 11th, she was walking down the street and she heard the news, and the first thing that came into her mind were lines from a poem by William Butler Yeats called The Second Coming. So to the forefront of her mind, these lines came forward: turning and turning in the widening gyre, the falcon cannot hear the falconer. Things fall apart, the center cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. The blood-dimmed tide is loosed, and everywhere the ceremony of innocence is drowned. And to hear someone say that in fact, years later in a context that had nothing to do with an English class, those words, those lines came into her mind to help her process an event, an experience which was otherwise, beyond comprehension and certainly beyond anybody's expectations. That really confirmed for me that, in fact, yes, there is something about literature that gets inside of us. So in my last visit with you, in this visit with you, my last, I want to share just a little excerpt from an essay that I like very much. It's an essay by a woman named Annie Dillard, called Teaching a Stone to Talk. It comes out of this book, Teaching a Stone to Talk. And it is in some senses a sort of dirge, that is a poem or a song of lament for our lost capacity to experience the miraculous in the world around us. I wanted to share this little piece with you because I like what it says about hope, and I like what it says about the creation of meaning. So I'm just going to read the first few paragraphs, and then I'll say a little bit about what this essay makes me think, and then I will bid you a good day. So here it is, Annie Dillard, Teaching a Stone to Talk. The island where I live is peopled with cranks like myself. In a cedar shake shack on a cliff, but we all live like this, is a man in his 30s who lives alone with a stone he is trying to teach to talk. Wisecracks on this topic abound, as you might expect, but they are made, as it were, perfunctorily, and mostly by the young. For in fact, almost everyone here respects what Larry is doing, as do I, which is why I'm protecting his or her privacy and confusing for you the details. It could be, for instance, a pinch of sand he is teaching to talk, or a prolonged northerly wind, or any one of a number of waves. But it is, in fact, I assure you, a stone. It is, for I have seen it, a palm-sized oval beach cobble whose dark gray is cut by a band of white which runs around and presumably through it. Such stones are called wishing stones for reasons obscure but not, I think, unimaginable. He keeps it on a shelf. Usually, the stone lies protected by a square of untanned leather, like a canary asleep under its cloth. Larry removes the cover for the stone's lessons, or more accurately, I should say, for the ritual or rituals which they perform together several times a day. No one knows what goes on at these sessions, least of all myself, for I know Larry but slightly, and that owing only to a mix-up in our mail. I assume that like any other meaningful effort, the ritual involves sacrifice, the suppression of self-consciousness, and a certain precise tilt of the will, so that the will becomes transparent and hollow, a channel for the work. I wish him well. It is a noble work and beats from any angle selling shoes. Reports differ on precisely what he expects or wants the stone to say. I do not think he expects the stone to speak as we do and describe for us its long life and many or few sensations. I think instead that he is trying to teach it to say a single word, such as cup or uncle. For this purpose he has not, as some have seriously suggested, carved the stone a little mouth, or furnished it in any way with a pocket of air which it might then expel. Rather, and I think he is wise in this, he plans to initiate his son, who is now an infant living with Larry's estranged wife, into the work, so that it may continue and bear fruit after his death. I like this essay because hope is sort of at the bottom of the idea she's describing here. Hope that appears impossible. And there's something that I find exhilarating about daring to hope that what seems impossible might actually come to pass. Dillard believes that hope's position in our world and in our lives is precarious nowadays. We don't have hope much anymore. She says that we've now cut down all the sacred groves and we've snuffed out the fire that was in that burning bush, because those sorts of things are no longer part of the way we understand ourselves and the way we understand our world. And she believes that's a loss that needs to be lamented. I would agree. In fact, back when I used to be an English teacher, I used to sometimes try and convince some of my students. Every now and then I would meet one or two who seemed like they would be good candidates for this. I would try to convince them to take up a project, to take up this very same project. Try to convince them that they should try to teach a stone to talk. Nobody ever took me up on that suggestion, and the truth was that what I really imagined, what gave me the most joy and pleasure, was imagining not those students who might have actually bent themselves to that task, but rather the classmates of those students. Years and years later, they're lying in bed at night next to their spouse, and they're thinking of everything that's happened to them, and thinking of everything that has not happened to them, and everything that might have happened to them, and suddenly one of them sits up and says, you know, there were these two guys I knew in high school who tried to teach a stone to talk. And his wife or her husband sits up on her elbow, and she gives that look. Why, pray tell? And one of those students would shrug and say, you know, I don't know why, but I sure hope they kept at it. Well, I would like to suggest that perhaps some of you in your spare time might decide to take up a project like this one yourselves I think that if you should undertake this sort of project, you should approach it the way Larry did, in the expectation that it's something that will take a long time. So you might, if you do decide to lend yourselves to this sort of adventure, I would suggest that you not expect to complete it in your lifetime, but rather that you set the ball in motion, or you set the stone in motion, if you will, and then leave it for the generations who might follow behind you to complete. And with that, my friends at Goodwin House, I bid you good night and farewell.